My name is Onyinye Ndefo, and I work for the ICB as the research lead. And what that means is that I'm responsible for supporting the growth of primary care research across our integrated care Northamptonshire system. So this REN project, Research Engagement Network Development Project, was funded by NHS England, and it's to look at how we can increase research activities in underserved communities that are not usually involved in research. So we, as a system, Integrated Care Northamptonshire, successfully bid for this funding, and what we were hoping to achieve with this is to go out into those underserved communities that we identified and ask the question about why they do not engage with research, why they don't want to engage with research, because usually we hear hard to reach communities, which is not always the truth, because these communities are there, they're not hard to reach. And so we prefer the term underserved because the responsibility lies with us to understand why the communities are not engaging with researchers. Another key role that research champions play is that they also educate the health and care staff and researchers about their community's experiences of research. And so it's a two-way system. The research champions are not just taking information back to their communities, but they're also feeding back to us about how their communities feel the impact of research that is being done. And that's a really key element of the role of research champions, which is why we want champions to come from the communities themselves. And they can then help us not only bridge that gap and build the trust, but also they have a role to play in educating health and care staff and researchers about the appropriate way to engage with their communities and the appropriate ways to communicate about research to their communities, so that we're all culturally competent when we approach the communities and when we engage with them to do research. And that means that research is not done to those communities, but research is done with the communities.
I'm Mavis Mundirwa, and I'm from Power of the Mind Networks, which is a local charity in Northampton, and we support Black women with all the issues that they might be going through. So it can be about housing, about domestic abuse, about anything to do with women, really, jobs and that sort of thing. So that's what we do as an organization. So this focus group was around barriers to research engagement from the Black community as a whole, and to actually try and understand why people don't really engage that much with research. And we had mostly women. And then again, they said about their experiences with their GPs, that most of the time they've experienced discrimination. They've from the admin staff when they're trying to book appointments and everything. Some of the time they feel they're not treated fairly, they're not valued, and their issues are not being taken seriously compared to the other communities. So this is where it starts. That's the reason why they are a bit apprehensive about participating in research. And then there's also the issue of language barriers. Some of them say the language that is used in the research, the questionnaires and whatever, is very complex language. And English is obviously not their first language. So, they'll need a translator, they'll need all that. And then at times that's why they just can't be bothered, they just leave it. But they've said, if there is availability of a translator to make them understand some of the questions in the research, so that they can be able to answer them really, then they would be interested in engaging with the research process. And then the other thing is that in some ways, they never get the feedback from what information they've given if they fill out forms, if they participate in any research, they've never actually got any feedback from her. And because of that, they feel like that goes back to the issue of being valued, trusting the process, thinking that the information that they are giving is gonna have an influence in any decision-making policies.
Hi, I'm Helen Perk. I work for STCYC doing wellbeing. I'm the wellbeing officer, and I've been working with the groups for 3 months, so it's quite interesting when we do surveys or we ask questions about what's going on and how they feel. I think some of the key issues we found were people are very suspicious of joining in, of, like you said, filling out questionnaires. They're very reluctant to sign disclaimers. So we struggle with disclaimers if we're doing any surveys or anything equivalent. But some of the main things is they are struggling with working with the NHS. Anything with health they're struggling with because there's a lack of trust with the NHS at the moment. So I think they find that when they go into government buildings, there's not very much trust. They find there's racism still, which shocks me because obviously we don't always come across it. But they still feel there's racism, that there's difficulty with communication. So as well, we like to bring in translators. So we've always got translators, people that speak Punjabi in the building. So we can translate it because sometimes they'll look at the questions and they're not quite sure, especially if they've just come into the country. So there's a big difference between people who've just come into the country and people that have been here a long time, because obviously they're used to the system. But when they first come in, it's quite shocking because the things we take for granted, they don't actually know. So with the surveys, it's the same thing. We just have to make them feel safe. With giving them food, giving them drinks, having their friends around them so they feel safe to talk. And then it has a knock-on effect. They'll go, oh yeah, that happened to me, or that happened, and yeah, no, I don't like that. So I think the main thing is have people around that they trust.
My name's Esther Stimson. I work for Healthwatch West and North Northamptonshire, and we were asked by Integrated Care Northamptonshire to look at the barriers for research for the general public. We held focus groups with 2 local organisations, the Hope Centre and their Hand Up service, dealing with homeless members of the community, and Bridge, who are a substance misuse programme in Northamptonshire. So at the Hope Centre, they wanted to know what they were going to get out of taking part in research. If it wasn't something that impacted them directly, what were they going to get out of it? And they were talking about incentives, and actually for some people it might be vouchers or a cash reward that might incentivise them to take part. But ultimately there was a lot of conversation around, is what I'm doing making someone else look good? Am I doing someone else's job for them? They also wanted to know that the information that they were giving people when they were taking part in research was going to be used and fed back to them in a way, and how that was done, if that was going to be done in an accessible format. We did promise them that with this piece of research we would take everything they'd said on board, and we've actually compiled an easy read version of the report which we'll go back and present to them. Because of the nature of the service users at the Hope Centre, It might not be the same participants that took part in the focus group, but they will have the opportunity to be there as well. So the other focus group we did was at Bridge, who are a substance misuse programme. The focus group there highlighted some slightly different concerns to those at the Hope Centre. They were concerned with how their data was being protected, where the information was going, and there was a real talk around trust. So we wouldn't trust anyone to come into the premises. It's because we had built up, again, as an organisation, that trust with the workers in that service. And they were willing to talk to us because of that. And even in that focus group, it wasn't at the beginning. Some people were still quite closed. And as time went on, the conversation started to open up and people became more open and willing to share personal experiences. With Bridge, the focus group there, they were very sure that although there was personal information, they didn't want to share that with just anyone. It was personal to them, and there was a lot of crossover between, if I share my personal information, actually, what are you going to do with that? Where is that going to go, and what impact? So crossover to the Hope Centre in the same way that they wanted to know what was being done with the information. This was more about personal safety and security. One of the things that came up in the focus group at Bridge was that if people were being asked to take part in local or national research around healthcare services that they'd used, they wanted advanced warning. They wanted someone to be able to send them a letter to say, you will be taking, like, we're going to be asking you to take part in this research, would you like to? Rather than being approached anonymously, I suppose, or without warning. So one of the things that came out of both focus groups was that actually online isn't the best way for them to receive information. The participants at the Hope Centre wanted people to go and speak to them in the same way that we had, and their lifestyles can often be quite chaotic, nomadic, and so they wanted people to come to a safe environment where they could talk. But similarly, the participants at Bridge were not overly happy with online communications only. That there was a lack of trust around what's safe online, what's not safe, how do we know that this is real, and valued those personal connections, which, as mentioned, come with trust. What I would take from the focus groups is actually in all research to do those focus groups if you're going to have a survey. Because if we'd asked the people in the focus groups to just complete the survey, we never would have got the same information from them, even though we were asking questions that related to the survey. The information was completely different and allowed them a space. I think going forward, I would recommend that we continue to include all groups of society. We continue to make sure that we hear people when they usually struggle to be heard, and give people a voice, but give them a voice and act on what they are saying.